I never imagined betrayal could taste so bitter, until the day my wife walked out the door with my best friend, leaving me shattered and alone. In those first 100 heart-stopping moments, every promise we'd ever made dissolved into a storm of anger and disbelief, and the realization hit me: my life had just been turned upside down. I could still hear her soft goodbye and see his guilty, familiar smile as they left, hand in hand. It was the kind of betrayal that sears your soul, leaving you questioning every trust you ever placed. And now, as fate would have it, they're both on my doorstep, desperate and pleading for a loan. I remember the day it all unraveled with excruciating clarity. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that promises nothing more than routine and monotony. I had just returned home from a long day at work, exhausted yet hopeful that tonight might bring a semblance of normalcy. Instead, I found an empty house, my wife's belongings neatly packed into boxes and a hastily scrawled note left on the kitchen counter. The note was short, almost indifferent. "I'm sorry, but I found someone who makes me feel alive. Don't try to change my mind." At that moment, the world I'd built with her and the years of trust one had placed in both her and my best friend crumbled into dust. The shock of that revelation turned every familiar corner of our home into a haunting reminder of what had been. I sank onto the sofa, a torrent of memories rushing back: late-night conversations, laughter over coffee, quiet moments of intimacy. It was all gone in a heartbeat. I spent the rest of the day in a numb haze, barely eating, barely moving, as I tried to process the betrayal that now defined my life. I found myself wondering how those two people, the ones I had loved and trusted, could turn their backs on me so casually. In the following weeks, I grappled with a turbulent mix of emotions: anger, grief, and an aching loneliness that felt as if it would never lift. Friends reached out with condolences, but their well-meaning words felt hollow against the raw, searing pain of my loss. I began to withdraw, retreating into the solitude of long walks in the city's quiet parks, trying desperately to find some meaning in the chaos. I questioned everything: my worth, the nature of love, and whether I had ever truly known who my wife and best friend were. Then, as if a cruel twist of fate were not enough, the unexpected happened. A few months after the divorce, I received a call from my ex-wife. Her voice was strained, laced with worry and a hint of desperation I hadn't heard before. She explained that she and my best friend were in a financial bind, something about an investment gone wrong and debts piling up that they couldn't manage. They needed money, and fast. I was taken aback. The same people who had torn my world apart were now standing on my doorstep, begging for a loan. It was surreal, a cruel irony that left me reeling. I spent many sleepless nights wrestling with conflicting emotions. Part of me, still burning with hurt and betrayal, wanted nothing more than to watch them suffer the consequences of their choices. Yet another part of me, the part that had slowly begun to rebuild my identity in the aftermath of the divorce, recognized that harboring bitterness would only chain me to the past. I had worked so hard to reclaim my life and redefine my worth. Now here they were, vulnerable and in need, and my heart was torn between the desire for revenge and the wisdom of moving on. During one of those long, restless nights, as rain tapped against my window and the quiet darkness pressed in, I decided to step back and evaluate what I truly wanted for my future. I wasn't interested in getting entangled in their drama again. I wasn't eager to become the unwitting bank for the very people who had betrayed me. Instead, I saw an opportunity, a chance to assert my newfound independence and prove to myself that I was in control of my destiny. I resolved that if I were ever to consider helping them, it would be on my own terms, with clear boundaries and a sense of detachment that reminded me that my worth was no longer defined by their needs. I began by focusing on my own recovery. I threw myself into my work with renewed determination, pushing aside the memories that haunted me and channeling every ounce of energy into building a future that was distinctly my own. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with friends who had always believed in me, and even started volunteering at a local community center. These activities became my sanctuary, a space where I could nurture my self-worth without being reminded of the past. Slowly I learned to forgive, not for their sake but for mine. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about absolving them of their mistakes. It was about freeing myself from the grip of resentment that threatened to paralyze me. Even as I rebuilt my life piece by piece, the call from my ex-wife lingered like an unwelcome echo in the back of my mind. I didn't answer it immediately. Instead, I let time pass, allowing myself to grow stronger and more secure in my identity. I started keeping a journal, documenting my thoughts, fears, and triumphs. With each written word, I felt a little lighter, a little more in control. I poured out my soul onto the pages, chronicling the transformation from the broken man I once was to the resilient individual I was becoming. It was a journey of self-discovery, a quest to understand that my value wasn't tied to the approval or actions of others, but to the strength I cultivated within. One day, after months of introspection and gradual healing, I received another call from her. This time, I answered with a calm voice that surprised even me. My ex-wife explained that their financial troubles had worsened and that they desperately needed a loan to keep their heads above water. My best friend was with her on the line, his voice tinged with desperation and regret. I could hear the uncertainty in both of them, a vulnerability that I hadn't expected from the people who had once shattered my trust. I told them that I needed time to think, that I wasn't ready to make any decisions on the spot. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the request settling heavily on my shoulders. It was as if the ghosts of the past were once again demanding attention, testing the boundaries of the new life I had worked so hard to create. I knew that this loan request was more than just a financial transaction. It was a challenge to the transformation I had undergone, a test of my ability to maintain my integrity in the face of lingering betrayal. That night, I sat in my study, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the pages of my journal as I wrestled with my next steps. I thought about the countless nights I had spent questioning my self-worth, the pain of betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable, and the long, arduous journey of rebuilding that had followed. I realized that I had reached a point where I had to decide. Would I allow the past to dictate my actions, or would I continue to forge a future defined by my own terms and values? The answer, as it slowly dawned on me, was to act with measured compassion and unwavering resolve. I owed it to myself to remain true to the person I was becoming. In that moment, I began to draft a response. Not an immediate yes or no to their request, but a carefully considered plan that would set the parameters of any assistance I might offer. I would not be their personal bailout fund, nor would I allow myself to be drawn back into the drama of their lives. Instead, I decided to help in a way that was both practical and emotionally detached, a way that would let me remain in control of my own destiny. I reached out to a trusted financial advisor to review my own situation, ensuring that any decision I made would not jeopardize the stability I had fought so hard to achieve. I spent the next few days analyzing my finances, weighing the risks and considering the potential outcomes. I knew that any loan I offered would have to come with strict conditions, a clear repayment plan, legal documentation, and an understanding that this was a business transaction, not a reconciliation of past hurts. It was a difficult decision to make, but I was determined not to let old wounds dictate my future. I drafted a proposal that outlined the terms, ensuring that my support would be temporary and that I would not be beholden to them indefinitely. When I finally called my ex-wife back to discuss the proposal, I could sense the tension on the other end of the line. Her voice was subdued, and even my old best friend, now on the line as well, spoke with an uncharacteristic humility. I explained my conditions calmly, making it clear that while I was willing to help, I expected the terms to be met without compromise. I emphasized that this wasn't an act of charity or an attempt to win forgiveness. It was a mutual agreement that respected the boundaries I had painstakingly established in the aftermath of our shared past. The conversation was long and fraught with pauses, as they both struggled to reconcile their pride with the reality of their situation. I could hear the conflict in their voices, a mixture of gratitude, regret, and reluctant acceptance. In that moment, I realized that the pain of betrayal had forced all of us to grow in unexpected ways. For me, it had been a journey of self-discovery and empowerment, and now I was extending that strength to help them, albeit on my own strict terms. As the call ended, I sat back in my chair, feeling a complex blend of emotions. Part of me was still seething with the memory of their betrayal, but another part was resolute in its commitment to move forward. I had set a precedent, a boundary that would not be crossed, and in doing so, I reaffirmed my newfound identity. I was no longer the man who had been left behind and broken by betrayal. I was a man who had rebuilt his life on his own terms, who had found strength in solitude, and who now possessed the power to shape his own destiny. In the weeks that followed, I worked diligently to ensure that my decision would not compromise my own stability. I maintained a careful distance from their personal affairs, meeting with my ex-wife and my former best friend only when absolutely necessary to finalize the loan details. Every interaction was measured, every word deliberate. I was determined not to let the emotional scars of the past interfere with the pragmatic steps I had taken to secure my future. The process was challenging, negotiating repayment schedules, drafting legal agreements, and navigating the complicated emotions that still lingered between us. Yet, as each detail was ironed out, I felt a growing sense of clarity and control. I realized that I had finally found a way to turn the tables, not to humiliate them or seek revenge, but to assert my independence and demonstrate that I was in charge of my own life. The loan, with all its strict terms, was a symbol of my self-reliance. It was a reminder that I could help others without sacrificing my own well-being. Over time, I began to see subtle changes in the dynamics between us. My ex-wife's tone softened in our conversations, and even my former best friend, now a distant memory of what once was, seemed to approach our interactions with a cautious respect. They were aware, I believe, of the transformation that had taken place in me, and they no longer saw me as the man who had been broken by their betrayal. Instead, they saw someone who had risen above the pain, someone who had built a life defined by self-worth and unwavering determination. As I reflect on these events now, I understand that the loan was never about money. It was about boundaries, about reclaiming control in a situation that once left me feeling powerless. It was about transforming old wounds into new opportunities, a way to extend help while maintaining my own hard-won independence. I have learned that true strength lies not in succumbing to bitterness, but in rising above it with grace and a clear sense of purpose. This chapter of my life remains a vivid reminder of how far I've come, from the moment she left me for my best friend, to the day I stood alone in the wreckage of our shared past, to the point where I could confidently set my terms and secure my own future. I discovered that my worth was never tied to their actions, that my true value was determined by the strength I found within myself. And as I continue to move forward, I do so with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every painful experience has been a stepping stone toward a life built on my own terms. A life defined by resilience, self-respect, and the unwavering belief that I am enough. This is the first part of my journey, a journey marked by betrayal, heartbreak, and the slow, steady rebuilding of a life that I control. The pain of that day still lingers, a reminder of what once was, but it no longer holds me captive. Instead, it fuels my determination to live authentically and to set boundaries that protect my newfound strength. In the next part of my story, I will share how this decision to help them on my terms further reshaped my life and solidified the person I have become. Someone who, despite the betrayals of the past, chooses to move forward with dignity, wisdom, and the quiet power of self-reliance. I still remember that electrifying moment when the echo of their desperate pleas collided with the steady rhythm of my newfound self-respect. A moment when I realized that even betrayal can be transmuted into strength. Their voices, trembling with regret and need, reached me through phone calls and anxious texts, a constant reminder of the past I'd left behind. In those first 100 heart-thudding seconds, I felt a surge of raw emotion, a mingling of pity, indignation, and an unwavering resolve that I would not let old wounds dictate my future. I had drawn clear boundaries long ago, and now it was time to see if my carefully built fortress could withstand the intrusion of those who once shattered it. In the weeks that followed my decision, I remained vigilant yet measured. I continued to honor the terms we had agreed upon, meeting my ex-wife and my former best friend in neutral settings to finalize repayment details and address lingering uncertainties. Each meeting was an exercise in restraint, a dance of polite conversation layered over the undercurrents of a painful history. I maintained a professional tone, keeping our interactions strictly transactional, for I knew that any emotional entanglement might reopen old wounds. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, I wrestled with a cascade of conflicting emotions. There were moments when I almost wanted to recoil from their pitiful expressions, to refuse any further contact with the ghosts of my past. But I also recognized that my transformation was not just about erecting barriers, it was about embracing a future defined by my own values. Late one evening, as I sat in my quiet study reviewing the latest repayment schedule and the accompanying legal documentation, I paused to reflect on the irony of it all. I had once been utterly devastated by their betrayal, my wife leaving me for my best friend, the two people I had trusted most turning their backs on me. And now, months later, they were turning to me as a lifeline in their financial storm. It was as though life, in its inscrutable wisdom, had brought us full circle. I recalled the nights I had spent wandering alone, haunted by memories and drowning in self-doubt. Back then, every step forward had been a battle against the crushing weight of abandonment. Now, every repayment they made, every formal agreement signed, was a small victory, a confirmation that I had not only rebuilt my life but had emerged stronger, more self-assured, and determined to protect my hard-earned independence. As autumn gave way to winter, the chill in the air mirrored the cool resolve in my heart. I attended the scheduled meetings with a quiet fortitude, watching as my ex-wife's voice softened with the weight of regret and my old best friend struggled to meet the expectations we had set. There were times when I sensed genuine remorse in their tone, a recognition that their actions had not only upended my life but had also sown the seeds of their own undoing. I could see the conflict in their eyes, Pity for themselves mingled with a cautious hope that perhaps in accepting my terms, they could salvage something from the wreckage of their choices. During one such meeting in a nondescript coffee shop, I listened as they explained how a series of poor decisions and unforeseen setbacks had left them teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Their words, measured and subdued, carried the weight of hard lessons learned the hard way. I nodded quietly, my expression unreadable, while internally I marveled at how life had a way of teaching us the value of accountability. I recalled the days when I had felt utterly powerless, when the betrayal had threatened to shatter not just my heart but my entire sense of self-worth. Now I was the one in control, a quiet architect of my destiny, setting firm boundaries and ensuring that my future remained untarnished by the shadows of the past. There were moments too when the memories would creep in unexpectedly. On a cold winter morning, as I sipped coffee on the balcony of my new apartment, I found myself staring into the distance, lost in reverie. The crisp air, the distant hum of the city, and the soft rustle of bare trees reminded me of the many nights spent in isolation, questioning if I would ever reclaim my sense of purpose. I had been tempted to let bitterness fester, to allow the pain of betrayal to dictate the course of my life. But instead, I chose to transform that pain into a quiet determination, a resolve that every setback was simply a stepping stone toward a brighter future. In those silent moments, I would remind myself that forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but about freeing oneself to move forward unburdened by its weight. Slowly, I began to see changes not only in my finances and career but also in my inner world. I immersed myself in personal development, reading books on resilience, attending workshops on mindfulness, and even rediscovering long-forgotten passions like painting and hiking. Each new experience was a reminder that I was more than the sum of my past mistakes, that my life was a canvas on which I could paint a new, vibrant future. I forged deeper connections with friends who had stood by me during the darkest times, and their support became a cornerstone of my renewed confidence. These relationships were built on authenticity and mutual respect, free from the toxicity that had once defined my closest bonds. As the repayment schedule unfolded and the interactions with my ex-wife and former best friend became more infrequent, I found myself reclaiming the space I had long guarded for my own healing. The burden of having to finance their mistakes slowly lightened, replaced by a sense of detachment that came from knowing I had made my own choices. I kept a journal, meticulously recording each milestone in my journey, a ritual that helped me process the complex tapestry of emotions that wove through my days. In those pages, I poured out not just the details of financial transactions but also the inner dialogue of a man who was learning to trust himself again. I wrote about the sting of betrayal, the exhilaration of small victories, and the quiet moments of introspection that reminded me of how far I had come. One particularly poignant evening, after a long day of work at the hospital where I now thrived as a respected professional, I attended a small dinner with a few close friends. The conversation turned inevitably to relationships, betrayal, and the painful ironies of life. I listened as one friend recounted his own experiences of heartbreak and recovery, his words resonating with a bittersweet familiarity. It was in that circle of trust that I realized I was no longer defined by the past. I had evolved into someone who could not only survive betrayal but also use it as a catalyst for growth. I shared bits of my journey, carefully without divulging every raw detail, and in doing so, I found that my story could serve as a beacon for others still struggling to reclaim their lives. Throughout this period, I began to see a remarkable change in the way I viewed success. It wasn't about accumulating wealth or proving a point to those who had once wronged me. It was about achieving a state of inner peace and satisfaction, a quiet triumph that came from knowing I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. The memory of that painful day when my wife left me for my best friend still lingered, but it no longer cast a shadow over my every step. Instead, it had become a part of my past, a chapter that, though filled with anguish, had ultimately led to a profound transformation. I was no longer the broken man who had once dwelled in regret. I was a man who had embraced his pain, learned from it, and emerged with a clearer understanding of his own worth. There were still challenges along the way. There were days when I would find myself wondering if I had made the right decision, if perhaps I was too hard on them, or if my strict boundaries might one day close me off from genuine connection. But each time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of the lessons I had learned, the importance of self-respect, the necessity of accountability, and the undeniable truth that my future was mine to shape. I sought solace in the steady rhythm of my work, in the quiet companionship of trusted friends, and in the simple pleasure of a long drive on an empty highway. In those moments, I felt a deep, abiding connection to the person I was becoming, a person defined not by past betrayals, but by the resilience and hope that had emerged from them. As the months turned into a year since that fateful loan agreement, I witnessed subtle yet profound shifts in the dynamics of our interactions. My ex-wife and my former best friend no longer viewed me as a means to an end. Instead, they began to acknowledge the changes that had taken place within me. Their tone was less desperate, more reflective, a quiet recognition that perhaps the choices they had made had come at a cost. I encountered them less frequently, and when our paths did cross, the conversations were marked by a respectful distance rather than the cloying familiarity of the past. I realized that true healing wasn't about reconciling with the people who hurt you, but about forging ahead with the strength to create your own destiny. One crisp spring afternoon, I found myself walking through a park on a gentle, sunlit day. The blossoms were in full bloom, their delicate petals a stark contrast to the harshness of winter memories. As I strolled along the winding paths, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. A journey that had been marked by heartbreak, betrayal, and the slow, steady rebuilding of a life that was entirely my own. I thought about the moments when I had felt utterly lost, when every step forward had been clouded by the shadow of what once was. And yet, here I was, breathing in the fresh scent of new beginnings, my heart lighter than it had been in years. That walk became a metaphor for my life, a reminder that even after the harshest winter, spring inevitably arrives, bringing with it a promise of renewal and hope. I began to see that the process of rebuilding was not linear. There were days filled with progress, and others where the ghosts of the past threatened to resurface with all their pain. I learned to accept that healing is a journey with its own pace, a series of ups and downs that ultimately leads to a deeper understanding of oneself. I started attending therapy sessions, where I could explore the complexities of my emotions in a safe, supportive environment. Through these sessions, I discovered that forgiveness, true forgiveness, is a gift you give yourself. It wasn't about absolving them of their wrongs, but about freeing myself from the chains of resentment that had once held me captive. Over time, I also began to channel my experiences into something creative. I started writing not just in my journal but in a blog where I shared my journey anonymously. I found that expressing my pain and the gradual steps of recovery helped me connect with others who had faced similar betrayals. The outpouring of support from strangers who found solace in my words was both humbling and inspiring. I realized that my story, filled with its raw vulnerabilities and hard-won victories, could be a beacon of hope for those still struggling in the aftermath of betrayal. In sharing my journey, I discovered that healing was not a solitary endeavor but a collective experience that united us in our shared humanity. There were also moments when I had to confront the painful irony of it all, when I recognized that the very people who had once caused me such heartache were now seeking my help. I found myself standing at a crossroads between old wounds and the desire to move forward with integrity. I chose to respond not with bitterness, but with the wisdom that comes from understanding the true cost of our actions. I maintained my boundaries, ensuring that my help was offered only as a professional courtesy and not as a way to reopen old scars. In doing so, I reaffirmed my commitment to living a life defined by self-respect and independence. As I look back on this chapter of my life, I am filled with a deep sense of gratitude. The pain of betrayal and the subsequent struggle were not steps toward ruin, but the very building blocks of my rebirth. I learned that the path to healing is often paved with the debris of what once was, a painful, necessary process that ultimately leads to a stronger, more resilient self. My journey from being abandoned by the two people I trusted most to standing firm in my new reality is a testament to the transformative power of resilience. In the quiet moments of solitude, when I find myself alone with my thoughts, I reflect on how far I have come. I remember the days of despair when every memory of my wife and best friend was a wound that refused to close, and I marvel at the person I have become, someone who can look at the past without bitterness, and who embraces the future with open arms. I understand now that the power to rebuild one's life lies within, and that no betrayal can ever diminish the strength of a person who is committed to living authentically. This phase of my life has taught me that self-worth isn't something that can be measured by the opinions of others or by the validation of those who once rejected you. It's built in the quiet moments of perseverance, in the resolve to set boundaries, and in the courage to move forward even when the pain of the past seems overwhelming. I have learned to celebrate my victories, no matter how small, and to see each setback as an opportunity for growth. My journey is a mosaic of scars and triumphs, and every piece tells a story of resilience and quiet defiance. Now, as I continue to chart my own course, I do so with a heart that is both cautious and open. I am no longer defined by the betrayal of my wife and best friend, nor am I bound by the expectations of those who once looked down on me. I have built a life that is unequivocally mine, a life where I stand as the guardian of my own destiny. I know that challenges will arise, that old memories might occasionally surface, but I also know that I have the strength to meet them head-on. The experience has also reshaped my understanding of forgiveness. I have come to see forgiveness not as an act of condoning past wrongs, but as a conscious choice to release the grip of resentment. By forgiving, I freed myself from the toxic chains of the past and created space for new beginnings. I now view every difficult encounter as a lesson, every scar as a badge of honor that marks my journey toward a more resilient self. In sharing these thoughts, I realize that my story is not just a personal catharsis. It's an invitation for others to see that transformation is possible, even after the deepest betrayals. My journey has been one of painful awakenings, of rediscovering the value within myself, and of crafting a future that is built on my own terms. And while the echoes of betrayal may never fully disappear, they have become part of the tapestry of my life. A tapestry that, in its entirety, speaks of strength, redemption, and the unwavering power of self-determination. Today I stand firmly in my own truth, a man who has reclaimed his life and built a future defined by resilience and purpose. I no longer allow the past to dictate my worth or my direction. Instead, I choose to honor the lessons it has taught me, and I continue to forge ahead with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that every ending is simply the precursor to a new beginning. My journey, marked by heartbreak and rebirth, is a testament to the incredible capacity of the human spirit to rise, rebuild, and thrive against all odds. This is the conclusion of my story for now, a story of betrayal turned into empowerment, of pain transformed into purpose, and of a man who, despite the harshest of betrayals, learned to build a life that is entirely his own. As I move forward, I do so with gratitude for the journey, with respect for the boundaries I have set, and with the unshakable belief that my worth is defined by my own choices and my own strength. And as I continue down this path, I know that every step I take is a victory over the past, a reminder that I am and always will be enough.